Nice to see you all, at least to see your icons and avatars, however we want to call this. Just wanted to say thanks again for coming over. And today we're going to be discussing some pretty intense things. I hope that you enjoy it. I hope that you learn something new. Um, and I guess here's a fun word on what happened about a month ago. So, unfortunately, I had a bit of an allergic reaction, and those things are not fun. So, I love to, introduce this little joke. I'm allergic to tree nuts, but just so you know, I have this in my house. This is the wonderful, wonderful blessing of peanut butter. And wow, I'm very tempted. Peanut butter is not a nut, it's a legume bean, which always blows people's minds who are not too familiar. But yeah, I'm allergic to tree nuts, and sometimes if I am around them or I ingest them, bad things happened. And a month ago, if you were around in the afternoon, the bad thing happened. And so, emergency room visit for me. But I'm okay now, like I said this morning in the video that you saw, and I'm ready to share some fun history with you. So I just want to go ahead and first of all, I want to acknowledge if you have any questions already for what we could be discussing, just as a preliminary, ooh, what's going on today? We can quickly do that and then we'll dive right in to what we're talking about. So you can either, if you feel like you want to unmute yourself, or you can ask that question in the chat before we begin. I just want to have that moment to interact with you since, unlike a month ago, I can't actually see you. So if you have something that you're like, oh, I want to say this, or there's something from last time that really stuck with me, I'd love to hear that before we begin our discussion. So I'll give you just a quick minute. All right, it's okay if you don't have any questions just yet because we haven't gotten to anything yet, but just wanted to give you that chance since you just didn't get a chance to do a Q&A last time and it was a month ago. So you may not remember. Did I hear someone about to start asking a question or are they just not muted? All right, I guess we'll just go ahead and begin. Here we go. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, let's make sure that that works the way I want to. All right, I hope that everybody is seeing what I want them to see. Are you seeing these big white letters and that's about it?
We're seeing your notes.
Oh no, I don't want you to see my notes. Oh wow. Well, this is all a part of the technology game, so just give me a second. Okay, let's try this here. All right, this looks about what I want. Still seeing the notes? And I
We got it.
can't.
Everything is clear.
Okay, so all you can see are my big white letters. So yes, what a curious title, right? The Holy Ghost didn't make us do the Seventh-day Adventist, the Civil Rights Movement, desegregation, and the future. So I'm just going to let you know that in the past, well, last month, if you remember, we discussed pretty much the origins of the Seventh-day Adventist movement all the way up to just about really the beginnings of the 1940s. We didn't even get close to talking about why we even have regional conferences today and what happened with that. And the last sermon I gave you was building up to something where, unfortunately, we had this moment when the Adventist church seemed to go backwards for a little bit, for lack of better words. They were like, well, this whole fundamentalist idea that only certain people are full members of Christ's church, only certain people should be treated as equal, whether they meant to or not, in order to fit in with other groups. They decided, well, unfortunately for African Americans, we hear you, but maybe we don't really want to see you that often. And they were also saying that, well, Ellen White said that we should be separate, right? but they were missing the fact of what Ellen White was talking about for her time period. She was really discussing, hey, we need to be careful in the work that we do in the South because people are being killed for this sort of thing. But moving forward, it shouldn't be this way. And into the 1910s and 20s, we're seeing the Seventh-day Adventist Church go more and more into this era of separation and segregation. And so, what I'm going to do today is we're going to pick right up from there and we're going to discuss what happens between, get ready for this, the 1940s all the way up to 2020s or so. This is going to be an 80-year long ordeal. I hope you'll stick around. I'm going to try to get through as much as this as I can without boring you. And we're going to keep on moving. So here we go. The Holy Ghost didn't make us do this. All right, so by the mid 1940s, there were about 20,000 Black Adventists in the United States. This comes from Calvin B.
And
Rock's
it's usually
Protest
down in one of
Progress.
these corners. Just
Ooh,
click them
we got somebody on the mic. So by the mid 1940s, there were about 20,000 Black Adventists in the United States. Calvin B. Rock, Protest and Progress. You really should check out this book if you haven't read it yet or you haven't heard about it already. So I want to tell you a story. I want to begin with this. Maybe you all have heard of this court case before, and maybe not, but this is Morgan versus Virginia in 1946. And yes, I know that it's Sabbath, and I know that, we want to talk about spiritual things, and that, yes, is very, very important. But we have to also acknowledge the ways that Seventh-day Adventists were active outside of their church. And this is one of those clear-cut examples. So this is who Morgan was. Her name was Irene Morgan. She was the subject of this 1946 U.S. Supreme Court case that struck down a Virginia law that required racial segregation on commercial interstate buses as a violation of this clause in the Constitution. So you all have heard the story. I'm so sure you've heard the story of Rosa Parks before. Rosa Parks does this in 1955, but this is Irene Morgan doing this in 1946. This is something that we often just kind of gloss over. She refused to give up her seat in what the driver said was the white section. So it's July 16th, 1944, and Irene Morgan, boards a Greyhound bus and she sits down next to another African American woman who is carrying an infant. An African American in these days could not sit next to or across from a white passenger, but on this particular bus, there wasn't a designated black or white seat on the bus. So when this white couple boarded this bus at a stop in Middlesex County in Virginia, the bus driver ordered Morgan and her seatmate to surrender their seats. Her seatmate immediately retreated to the back of the bus with her infant, but Morgan refused to give up her spot. And when Morgan would not move, the bus driver got off the bus to find a sheriff. And the sheriff presented Morgan with an arrest warrant. Here you go. I'm going to arrest you, he says. But instead, this is what Irene Morgan does. She takes the piece of paper, she tears it up in front of them, and she throws it out of the window of the bus. When the sheriff tried to touch her to pull her out of the seat, get ready for this, she kicked him in the groin, kicked him in a place where he didn't want to be kicked. The sheriff hobbled off the bus, and another sheriff was sent on. And this is what Irene Morgan said later. He touched me, and that's when I kicked him in a very bad place. He hobbled off, and another one came on. I was going to bite him, but he looked dirty, so I clawed him instead. I ripped his shirt. We were both pulling at each other. He said he would use his nightstick. I said, we'll whip each other. The second sheriff got off the bus to grab the deputy. And sure enough, yes, Irene Morgan was arrested. She had been charged with resisting arrest and violating Virginia's Jim Crow transit law. On October 18th, 1944, Morgan attended her court case. She agreed to pay a $100 fine for resisting arrest, but she refused to plead to the segregation violation. Since Maryland, where she was from, did not enforce segregation for this sort of travel, Virginia's Jim Crow law could not possibly apply to Morgan. She gets involved with the NAACP and it gets up to the Virginia Supreme Court, and they take this court case up to the United States Supreme Court, and Irene Morgan ends up winning. I'm telling you this story because Irene Morgan, as I mentioned before, was a lifelong Seventh-day Adventist. She died at the age of 90, and I believe that was in 2007. So yeah, if she were alive today, she would be in her 100s. But this is an example of Seventh-day Adventists being involved in civil rights before, the classical civil rights movement, we call it, before Rosa Parks refuses to get off the bus, before Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is doing his thing. We have a Seventh-day Adventist also doing this just by existing. She just simply refused to move. And lay people, which those are people who are not pastors or ministers or that sort of thing, lay people, Seventh-day Adventists, are a core part of the reason why the Seventh-day Adventist Church was forced to integrate and to desegregate. So let's move on here to Calvin B. Rock's book. This is Black Adventist Protest Movements, of course, is what he's really talking about. These are his four major arguments: that there is a push for social and administrative participation, which is structural integration. We talked about that a month ago. If you don't remember, thankfully, your church records things, so you should go and check that out before. Number two, the push for colored conferences. I'm using the terms of the day, so we will call those Black conferences today. So the push for colored conferences, structural accommodation, the push for Black unions, which was modified structural autonomy, 1969 to 1980, the push for equitable retirement security. All of these things are really the core tenets of what Dr. Rock is discussing in his book. I really ask that you read that. You will be surprised and you will learn quite a few things. Very, very important book. Dr. Rock was also president of what was then called Oakwood College for several years, and he is still living today. He is himself almost 100 years old, but is in still great health and is continuing to remind us of our true Adventist heritage, which is what we're doing here today. I'm not going to get into probably sections 3 and 4 and what he's talking about, but we are going to discuss the push for Black conferences today, which I know is a question that we continue to have constantly. But you should know this, that perhaps no other event in Seventh-day Adventist history was the primary catalyst for race relations in the church. And this event was about this woman. This is Lucille Byard, born in 1877, died in 1943. This is the story that shook the Adventist Church in the United States. And you might see somebody that you might recognize on the bottom right corner there. That's Dr. Benjamin Baker. He runs the website Black SDA History. I think that's .org. And yes, he's the person that if you have any sort of question about this sort of thing, you can easily find so many resources that he's compiled and put together and researched, wrote his dissertation on. I think it was an 800-page dissertation on all about this Black Adventist history. But he is the person who really helped us uncover this story, and it's going to come back. So I hope that you're paying attention and that you're still with me, because this story is going to come back when we discuss even some things that are happening now in 2024. So this is the story that shakes the Black Adventist Church and the Adventist Church as a whole. Lucy Byard, she's a 66-year-old Black Seventh-day Adventist woman from Jamaica, Long Island, New York. Not Jamaica the country, Jamaica like the neighborhood, in Long Island, New York. She develops liver cancer with a chronic case of cachexia. Maybe some of you medical people know what cachexia is, but it's literally translated as wasting away disease. She and her husband wanted her to be treated in an Adventist facility because Lucy Byard said, I'd love to be treated by my own people, and be among my own people, some Seventh-day Adventists who are just like me. And when her husband makes arrangements for her to take the train from New York City and to come all the way down to Tacoma Park, Maryland area, what the hospital, the sanitarium, didn't realize was that they were going to open up their sanitarium to a Black woman. But the sanitarium already confirmed that Byard would be admitted on a specific day. That was September 21st, 1943. And the Byard's church out in the New York area had decided they were going to pay for all of the medical bills. But like I said before, the sanitarium didn't realize that Lucy Byard was Black when they confirmed that she could be admitted to this facility. So before I get into what happens next, I want you to know about what sanitariums were. You've probably heard, of course, you have Advent Health all over you down there in Florida, but sanitariums were. They promoted a holistic approach to health and wellness. It's right there. But Washington Sanitarium, which is near the campus, right on the campus of Washington Adventist University today, um, they were well known across the country, just like Battle Creek, for just the different standards of care that they had for for their patients. They emphasize what is called a social component, and so patients would socialize together indoors in the dining room and then outside on the sanitarium grounds. But keep in mind, this is 1943. This is Maryland, and contrary to popular belief, Maryland is the South. It's south of the Mason-Dixon line, which means that yes, Jim Crow is active here. So put that together. If we've got a social component as part of this holistic healthcare, this means that perhaps certain people can't enjoy that full social component. And unfortunately, this included Lucy Byard. So racial segregation was enforced in Maryland and the Adventist Church, even though the Adventist Church and Adventist healthcare was a private institution. If Blacks were admitted, as they were on very rare occasions, they were isolated and treated by physicians during off hours. This is an example of, like I talked about a month ago, second-class citizenship within their own church. And so the hospital said, well, if you don't like this private arrangement, we're sorry, we just really can't see you here, but you can go down the street to Freedman's Hospital in Washington, D.C. So this is Freedman's Hospital. And if you've ever been on the campus of Howard University here in Washington, D.C., you might recognize this building as today. I think it's the Student Resources Center and the Communications Building, still standing. This is Freedman's Hospital. And so Lucy, remember, she arrives in September of 1943, September 21st, September 22nd, around then. And then she is told to come down to this hospital where they would be able to treat her. Now, what's really disappointing is that Lucy is a Seventh-day Adventist, a lifelong Seventh-day Adventist, and she's really hoping to be treated amongst people who would really understand her faith. In fact, it was even said that her health, she felt better when she was on the train from New York coming down to Washington, D.C., just excited that she was going to be receiving the best of care and that that care was a part of her church's ministry efforts. But unfortunately, she was sent away, turned away. And about a month later, on October 30th, 1943, Lucy Byard passed away right here in this hospital. And her immediate cause of death was liver cancer and cachexia. But what happened next fundamentally changed the Seventh-day Adventist Church forever. I want to let you know all about the Avengers. Maybe some of you know this woman here in this picture. She is one of my favorite people to talk about. This is Dr. Eva B. Dykes. And she and a big group of people, they formed what I like to call a dream team of Black Seventh-day Adventists that decided that enough was enough. Something needed to be done about the, in their quotes, unchristlike behaviors of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So this is Dr. Eva B. Dykes, and maybe you don't know who she was, but she was the first Black woman in the United States to complete the requirements for a PhD. And I'm going to say that again, the first Black woman in the United States, period. I didn't say first Black Seventh-day Adventist. No, just outside of our Adventist world, she was the first Black woman in this country to complete the requirements for a PhD. She's one of the first three to walk at graduation at all. She gave up her position as a well-known professor at Howard University. And Howard University, you know, through the years has been a center for Black intellectuals across the country for over 150 years now. And she was a professor there. before she decided after this event, that she needed to go down and teach at then Oakwood Junior College in 1944. Maybe some of you have also heard today of the Aeolians. They are the choir of the world today, highly decorated. Well, we wouldn't have the Aeolians without Dr. Eva B. Dykes, who created this choir. And if you've ever been to Oakwood's campus, you've probably seen this great library, this big building. The library on that campus is named after Eva B. Dykes. This woman was a part of a large committee that sought to challenge the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And even her own relatives, though, during this time, were not deemed fit enough to attend non-white Adventist institutions. So here's something that happens to her. This is a letter that Dr. Dykes gets, I guess, from her niece, who had tried to go to what is now Loma Linda University. We find ourselves in a position that makes it impossible for us to accept colored students. So yes, even someone related to someone so decorated as Dr. Dykes still didn't have a chance to further their education in an Adventist institution. And so this is what this group does. They're the Committee for the Advancement of Worldwide Work Among Colored Seventh-day Adventists. Try to say that 5 times really quickly. It's a bit of a mouthful, but we're just going to call them the committee. They are the first organized protest of Black American Adventist lay people. They argue these things: the policy and the educational and medical programs are discriminatory and unchristlike. The policy used in the area of employment is unfair, partial, and unchristlike. The policy in spiritual matters is too one-sided and narrow, advocating for maybe understanding what it's like to be a Black person in America and what those spiritual needs are. Those things were not considered. Too narrow. They created this document called Shall the Four Freedoms Function Among Seventh-day Adventists? This was in the spirit of President Franklin D. Roosevelt's Four Freedoms speech, which was around the same time. African Americans fought for victory abroad, at home, but also in their churches. The Seventh-day Adventist Church was just no different. And so I want to remind us of this. Yes, we're talking a lot of history today. A lot of it is difficult history, but this always has a spiritual component. You've heard this verse so many times, but I just want you to take this time and read it with me. Don't pattern your life after this world, but let God transform you from the inside out and give you a new way of thinking. Then you will know what is good and pleasing to Him, and what it's not, and what is not. Romans 12:2. It's true, the Adventist Church was guilty of patterning their policies on the patterns of the world. When they once used to accept their prophetic voice to proclaim, remember from last time, that all have sinned and that all were worth something to Christ. I kept repeating a month ago this old quote from VeggieTales, that God makes you special and He loves you very much, that the Adventist Church said 120, 140 years ago. This is true. This is revolutionary. We're going to continue to do this work. They were starting to wake up, because Black Seventh-day Adventists who still very much believed in these truths were reminding us of this over and over again. This committee that I've been talking about was hoping to convince the Seventh-day Adventist Church to remember their Adventist heritage and prophetic voice. We weren't supposed to be like the world in this way. And so again, here are some of those four freedoms that they were specifically talking about. This was inspired by Ellen White's The Southern Work, and we talked about that about a month ago as well. Number one, repair as far as in their power, past injury done to the colored people. Show exact and impartial justice to the Negro race. Remember, I'm using things in the quotes of their time period. Increase the force of colored workers. Throw their influence against the customs and practices of the world. This is what this committee is saying to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Remember what one of our pioneers had said about how we need to treat other people, especially people who had been enslaved for so long and are suffering under the system of Jim Crow. This is what we're supposed to be like to people. And so you see this map here. This is a map of the regional conferences as they appeared by about 1970s or so. Then the 1940s, After this Lucy Byard affair happens, and there truly is, I'm glossing over some of this, there was a back and forth between the committee and Black Adventist ministers and the General Conference going back and forth and saying, hey, it's not that we want to separate or segregate ourselves. We are looking for ways to make sure that we can showcase the Adventist message across our own people and do that work and own our own finances and have our own leadership that is still at the same level as state conferences and others and be able to just continue to do the work. And so here's a little bit about that. After Lucy Byard's passing and activism, General Conference leadership agreed that it was time to create Black conferences. And they came up with these ideas in April of 1944. And so I'm going to read you the exact documents, and you can find these things in the Adventist archive. It's digitally preserved, so if you doubt me, you can find that yourself. This is what they said. It appears that a different plan of organization for our, remember time period, for our colored membership would bring further great advance in soul winning endeavors. Therefore, we recommend one, that in unions where the colored constituency is considered by the Union Conference Committee to be sufficiently large and where the financial income and territory warrant, colored conferences be organized. That these colored conferences be administered by colored officers and committees, that in the organization of these conferences, the present conference boundaries within each union need not be recognized. And so at that moment, they created the Lake Region Conference, the Northeastern Conference, the Allegheny Conference, and over time, we added a few more, as you can see from this map. Southwest region, South Atlantic, and of course, Allegheny East and West split off into two in about 1967. South Central Conference, Central States, all of these conferences today are our regional conferences. And so you have to just, if you can, zoom out a little bit and imagine what this meant. For all those years, Black Adventist people have been saying, hey, we want to continue to do our work and to go out there and to be there for our people and spread the three angels message and to spread the revolution of the Sabbath. Please allow us to continue to do this without, unfortunately, being subject to a lot of racist, paternal ideas about African Americans, even within the church. Finally, after all these years, unfortunately, it took a tragedy for this to happen. But here we are, regional conferences. This is what gave Black Adventists a degree of autonomy and self-governance. They could now make decisions about their own personnel. They could use their funds for their own mission work and prioritize certain missions that meant a lot to them and maybe their urban communities. The authority of Black administrators of Black conferences were grounded in the Black churches that made up those conferences. But this isn't where the story ends. I know that it is so easy for us to say, well, we've got Black conferences, we understand the state conferences, the unions, and that's it. That's where it ends. Well, this is barely 1944, and into the 1950s, we still have a civil rights movement to go. And there are more stories for me to share, and I hope that you find these things engaging. Maybe you know who this is. I hope that you do. But you know which, I don't want to call it a club, but I will. Which organization, which group? They were eventually called the Little Rock Nine. And maybe you've heard this story before. Back in 1957, these 9 African American students were chosen to help desegregate Little Rock Central High School in Arkansas, and they went through a whole ordeal. But one of these 9 people was a Seventh-day Adventist. His name is, because he's still very much alive, is Terrence Roberts. And I actually had the privilege of meeting him and actually inviting him to Southern Adventist University when I was its student association president a couple of years ago. And, you know, have a good look. We happen to differ in how much hair we have on our heads. And I too haven't had that much hair in a little while now, but these are old fun pictures that I love to show. And so the Little Rock Nine, this is their story. The NAACP, which if you don't know is the National Advancement for National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. They were able to help Terrence Roberts and the other 8 Black students by filing injunctions against the Arkansas governor, who ordered the Arkansas National Guard to prevent the students from entering the high school. So I'm just going to pause there. What I'm saying right now is that the governor of Arkansas enlisted the use of the National Guard there in Arkansas to stop these students from being able to go to school. That's it. Even though the federal government had said with Brown versus Board of Education that this whole segregation in the public school sector needs to stop. Let's start integrating these things as soon as we can. And so some governors said, absolutely not. That's an idea called massive resistance. And they said, we don't want this, and we're going to do everything in our power to make sure that these students cannot attend these schools. And so this is an example. A few weeks later, after the NAACP argued in federal court against this Arkansas governor, the students were escorted into the building through a side entrance by the Little Rock police. But unfortunately, an enormous crowd formed in front of the school, and they were threatening to get into the school and forcibly take these Black students out of the building and do who knows what to these poor young students. And eventually, the president of the United States at this time, this was Dwight Eisenhower, he federalized the Arkansas National Guard and sent in the Army to ensure integration would happen. If you can really imagine how dramatic this was, the United States Army is coming to your school now to protect you and allow you to just go to class, go to your PE class, make sure that you're safe and seated at lunchtime and these sorts of things, that you're not being, threatened with your life during this time period. On several occasions, Terrence Roberts here in this picture, was harassed in school. He was kicked and bullied and punched, and he faced his assailants head on. He didn't retaliate with violence, but with dignity. And there's a story in which a student comes up to him with a bat in his hand, comes straight up to Dr. Roberts and says a couple of things to him, but Dr. Roberts just stood strong, looked at him, and that poor student was like, all right, dropped the bat, kept on walking on his way. These students had to have a spiritual rock, really, in order to do these kinds of things. And I want to stress that the Dr. Roberts Seventh-day Adventist upbringing really, really helped him remember that he was God's child. So those students were able to continue to go to school, but it wasn't without difficulty, as I just told you. By 1958, the Arkansas governor was given the authority to close the state's public schools, specifically Little Rock's public high schools. Between this and added pressure from the white community, the Roberts family ended up leaving Arkansas. They went to California instead. And I just really want you to imagine that your governor is so incensed by the idea of Black people coming to a public school and getting an education like everybody else, is able to just say, you know what, we're just going to close the school. This is entirely too much. And one of those Black Seventh-day Adventist children, unfortunately, needed to leave to find some better educational resources for himself. That was the reality there in the 1950s and 1960s. Now, you can't talk about the desegregation and civil rights movement in the Seventh-day Adventist Church without talking about this man here. This is Dr. Frank W. Hale Jr., just passed away back in 2011. Activist, champion of civil rights, educator, administrator, and diversity, equity, and inclusion proponent, big supporter. A couple of quick things about his life. He desegregated Union College there in Lincoln, Nebraska. He challenged the church to rescind its racist policies. He was the president of Oakwood College between 1966 and 1971. Hilariously, I asked my grandmother about him not too long ago, and she said, oh, yes, I remember Dr. Hale. He was great. Students really, really loved him. And for me, it's just so amazing to see how close people like you and I are to the real history that, for people like me, I read in a book, but instead for some of my grandparents and other relatives, they lived this thing. They're able to still tell me about it. He was a friend of Jesse Jackson and worked with Operation Push. Some of you might remember Jesse Jackson, who, of course, is still very much alive himself and does all sorts of great civil rights work. And his legacy, Frank Hale's legacy, is immortalized at The Ohio State University. There's a whole building and cultural center named after this man. This is a Seventh-day Adventist who was a real champion, who pushed himself to the limit to make sure that that idea that God made us special, all of us special, and that we all have something to give to society and our church. He made sure that that mattered. Came from a background that stressed education and Black self-dignity in the face of racism. And in high school and college, he directly challenged his institutions to stop their racist policies. So at Union, for example, he pushed the administration to stop forcing Blacks and whites to sit at separate tables in the cafeteria and to hire more African Americans on the faculty. But here's really the big moment for him that started to shift some things. It's 1960. Dr. Hale at this point is teaching, I believe that's at Central State College, and he is in Detroit for a meeting for one of those conferences for education, higher education. But on Sabbath, he says, oh, you know what? My daughter is coming of age to be able to attend academy soon. There's a nearby academy here. Let me go over and visit. Maybe some of you are a little bit more seasoned than the rest of us. And you might remember Adelphian Academy. Adelphian Academy, which of course still exists. I believe it's Adelphian Junior Academy now, but it's in Holly, Michigan. Hale drives on over there and he inquires to the student, not the student dean, but the dean of women about enrollment for his daughter. And instead, he learns that, well, we only have about 3 Black students out of maybe about 300 students, and that's only for very special occasions. Dr. Hale realizes that there are what we call racial quotas in Adventist schools. And what that means is that only a certain amount of Black people could attend an Adventist school at any given time. And typically, those Black students were like the children of ministers or maybe a president of a regional conference or something like that. But it was only very few and very little. And typically their experiences were rather rough because they weren't necessarily wanted in our Seventh-day Adventist schools. So when Dr. Hale learned this, he was upset. He was incensed. He said that this was unacceptable. And the church, we need to organize against this. He forms this thing called the Laymen's Leadership Conference. And so here are the goals. They were established to combat racial prejudice, racial segregation, and racial discrimination within the church. Here's a direct quote. Adventists failed to desegregate, failed to establish race relations institutes to study this issue, and this is hitting it hard, feared losing conservative prejudiced dollars. Total integration of the Seventh-day Adventist Church must happen now. This was Dr. Hale and this Layman Leaderships Conference ideas. They weren't going to accept this any longer. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of why here pretty soon, but it's no secret that the Seventh-day Adventist Church was just a little bit late on these things. So first of all, here is their platform. Additionally, they called on our church to adopt a positive stance on race relations. They said you should open your institutions of higher learning to African Americans and stop that racial quota number system you've got going on. You should provide equal employment opportunities to all people, stop the racial discrimination in the churches, and pay attention to what the Bible says about race. We have talked now, you and I, Newport Richie, we've talked now for a month about God made us special, loves us very much, that revolutionary idea. And we've also talked about how the Bible was used even during the time of slavery to keep African Americans in a certain position of servitude forever. But Frank Hale also said, but the Bible talks about people being no longer slave nor free, and all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And I should love my brother as myself. He was trying to remind us of our true heritage and our true selves. This is another example of someone looking to do that. So from the outset, The LLC, this is what I'm just going to call the Layman's Leadership Conference at this point. It is a few too many words. The LLC received phone calls and letters informing them of various discriminatory acts committed against African Americans. Accounts of Black students denied admission to white schools, African Americans barred from white churches, the collusion of church leaders with segregationists, Calvinist pastors using the biblical narrative of Noah's curse to justify racism. We talked about that a month ago, and discrimination in hiring. And some Adventists opposed this work by the LLC because of the pressure it placed upon the denomination to address these social political issues. They argued that taking what they thought was a partisan position was incompatible with the church's gospel commission to evangelize the world. In response, Hale contended that the church should take the lead in setting community standards, not the other way around. Furthermore, as a Christian denomination professing to have a special message for the world, it was imperative that the Seventh-day Adventist Church make its position known on these socio-political and ethical matters. And so eventually, they're able to do this in 1961. This was the idea that racial segregation is incompatible with the Christian faith. If you look a little bit there at the small print, 1961 General Conference declares this. Clearly, the work is going well, and so it seems. They actually released the statement unanimously, but they were still, like I hinted at earlier, one of the last denominations in the entire country to make a statement like this. So I'm just going to list off a couple, and maybe you know some of these churches, but they all were before us in announcing that this idea of racial segregation is wrong. So number one, the United Church of Christ, they released their statement in 1956. The Methodist Church, 1956. The Presbyterian Church, 1956. The American Baptist Convention, 1956. The American Unitarian Association, 1957. The Disciples of Christ, 57. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, 1958. And the Southern Baptists and the Southern Presbyterians in the mid 1950s as well. Until 1961, the Seventh-day Adventist Church has nothing to say about this issue. It had to be pushed. Some Black Adventists had to say, hey, we believe in these things, don't we? Don't we? Why are we waiting so long? But by 1965, and again, I'm glossing over a little bit of the story of Dr. Frank Hale and the LLC. You should really read about that. In fact, I've got an article coming out in the Encyclopedia of Seventh-day Adventists all about what they did and the hard work that it took and the back and forth between the General Conference and these lay groups. You should really read that soon. But by 1965, we have the Spring Council of the General Conference. And if you're not familiar, these councils, Spring Council, Autumn Council, or when the General Conference has these just large meetings and they discuss a myriad of things. But here is finally when they make a real distinction and, if you will, a policy stating, I suppose, the future of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in North America. Membership in office in all churches and on all levels must be available to anyone who qualifies, without regard to race. Number two, in our educational institutions, there should be no racial bias in the employment of teachers or other personnel, nor in the admission of students. Number three, hospitals and rest homes should make no racial distinction in admitting patients or in making their facilities available to physicians, interns, residents, nurses, and administrators who meet the professional standards of the institution. All of that to say, they're saying, all right, it's time to desegregate our church. Every single aspect of this, we have been behind. And if you look really closely here, please, wear your glasses and try not to squint too hard. But if you look closely here on the actual document, the primary source, they use an Ellen White quote. No distinction on account of nationality, race, or caste is recognized by God. He is the maker of all mankind. All men are of one family by creation, and all are one through redemption. Christ came to demolish every wall of partition, to throw open every compartment of the temple, that every soul may have free access to God. In Christ, there is neither Jew nor Greek, bond nor free. All are brought nigh by his precious blood. And with that, it's finally time to talk more about the civil rights movement itself and desegregation. During this time, Black Adventists were active in the civil rights movement. Some took part in the Poor People's Campaign there in 1968. Others assisted in the prosecution of those who lynched African Americans, especially in the case of Emmett Till. If you have not heard of that story or read that story, I implore you to read that. It is one of the other primary catalysts for what I call the classical civil rights movement. A 14-year-old child is killed and his killers do not receive jail time. Um, Black regional conferences were given money by the federal government to research the terrible conditions of African Americans. Some African American Adventist members joined SNCC. Others joined the NAACP. Pastors allowed civil rights groups to use their facilities. Many Black Adventist lives were threatened, and sometimes the General Conference told these Black ministers and lay people to stop being so involved. But regional conferences shielded them from these admonishments and encouraged them to continue. Another aspect of why regional conferences needed to exist, especially in this time, so that Black Adventists could use their own sources of income and their churches as spaces of refuge to continue the true Christian spiritual work of making sure that everybody realizes that they are valued to God. So without further ado, it's time to, I'm not going to call it a game. It feels like a game show, but let's desegregate. Here is what that looks like at some of our institutions of higher learning. And some of these things are incomplete stories because I'm in the midst of helping to tell them. I'm writing my dissertation on some of these things. And so you're going to get just a snippet here and there of what's going on. So this is Columbia Union College, what we now call Washington Adventist University. The Pine Forge Seven, the president of Columbia Union, CUC at the time, requested that some students from Pine Forge Academy, if you don't know Pine Forge, they're historically Black Adventist boarding academy in Pennsylvania. In fact, I believe they're one of four in the entire country, Black boarding schools left in the United States. But the president at CUC invites some of these students from this academy to come to Columbia Union College to help integrate the campus upon their graduation. And we have some brave seven students that endured some pretty racist experiences, but they remained active Adventists and they participated in ministry. And I'm still uncovering some of their stories. And what's great is that some of them are still alive. So there's an opportunity to learn more about what this was like, and also what it means to be a Seventh-day Adventist and still, feel the pain from your church and your church family, and yet continue to rest in the hope of the Second Advent and the Sabbath. Up next, we have AUC, Atlantic Union College. This story is a bit of a tragedy. This woman pictured here is Dr. Susan Willoughby. She was one of the first Black professors at AUC, and during her time, she advocated for equal pay for both men and women, created AUC's Black Christian Union program. She began sickle cell testing for Black AUC students in the 80s, and she was one of the researchers for the development of the birth control pill as we know it today. But when the Willoughby family moved to South Lancaster, Massachusetts, their white next door neighbors moved away after just 2 months after the family claimed, and get ready for this, after the family claimed that they could see the Willoughbys, this is their quotes, monkey tails when they took their clothes off at night. The Adventist family who sold the Willoughbys their home lost their real estate business for selling to a Black family in this Adventist neighborhood. The N word was also painted across a large boulder in front of the Willoughbys' home. And African American students, once allowed at AUC, were subject to terrible bullying. In one account, someone shattered some glass, defecated, and placed it in front of a Black student's dorm room so that that student would have infections when they walked out of their room. And even into the 1990s, some alumni and community members claimed that they would not donate to the school any longer because it had become African Union College. This idea that racism in the Adventist church just ends once in 1965 the GC releases their statement, that's not accurate. You can't just make something happen in policy and suddenly people just get it together. even over time, we're still having some of these racist experiences, and we're going to talk about the 21st century here pretty soon. Here at Andrews University, or what was called Emmanuel Missionary College, the question, and maybe you've heard of even a book called this before, why are all the Black kids sitting together in the cafeteria? And that's because here at Andrews University, they couldn't sit anywhere else. They were told that they had to sit at separate dining tables, blacks and white students. And there is also rumors of cross burnings by the Ku Klux Klan at Andrews University. The same can be said for some other colleges, like Southwestern Union College, as it was called, and we know it today as Southwestern Adventist University. At SWAU, the Ku Klux Klan burned a cross underneath the first Black student's dormitory, and this first Black student went on to become a president of the Southwest Region Conference decades later. And students also set off a pipe bomb in the bathrooms while the student was showering. It's also documented that the Ku Klux Klan once donated to an Adventist church in Oklahoma, so in the Southwestern Union, and allowed the church to build their building. And now, this one might shock you. And this one is difficult because I recognize, we're in Florida, and many of you did go to Southern, what is now called Southern Adventist University. But when it was Southern Missionary College, and maybe some of you were students when it was called this, or maybe you have relatives, here are a myriad of things that were going on. One, you had a segregated cafeteria. The first Black person to eat in that cafeteria was the great and notable evangelist, Pastor E.E. Cleveland, who, when they were there for a meeting and they all stood up for lunch, they looked at E.E. Cleveland funny because he got in line with everybody else. And he and the president had a bit of a standoff, and the president said, "Fine, I guess you guys can eat here too." That was as simple as that. But a president's mandate, I want to talk to you about a man named Leroy Leisky. He was the president of the Southern Union Conference from 1964 to 1965. Did you catch that? 1964 to 65. That's only about a year. Why so little? Because when he announced his intention to integrate everything in the Southern Union Conference, white power brokers in the audience planned their strategy for his removal. Leisky is given credit for allowing the Black presidents of the regional conferences to become voting members of SMC's Board of Trustees. But after just 13 months on the job, Leisky was removed from his position. The Ku Klux Klan also was said to have burned crosses there. I believe that's in front of Wright Hall and in front of Cowge during this time. And the federal government, specifically Attorney General Nicholas Katzenbach, called the General Conference and said, "Are you moving forward with desegregation yet?" And they said, "Well, we're having trouble with Alabama Mississippi Conference, what we call today Gulf states." And so Attorney General said, "All right, in 2 weeks, I'm going to call you again, and I expect some progress." And the General Conference called Mississippi, Alabama, and said, "Hey, are you getting close to desegregation integration? Because if not, we're going to lose our tax exempt status." And with that thought in mind, they went ahead and integrated. And when 2 weeks came by and the Attorney General called again, the General Conference said, "Yes, we've desegregated. We're doing it right." And there is a quote that was said from a Southern administrator. We don't know who. This is an oral history that was done by the historian Samuel G. London for his book, Seventh-day Adventist and the Civil Rights Movement. But he records this quote that came from, that was said to Charles Dudley, who was a minister for the South Atlantic Conference, that said the whole quote for this entire presentation today: "The Holy Ghost didn't make us do this, the federal government did." So I want us to just take a minute there. The Holy Ghost didn't make us do this integration project. The federal government threatened to take away our tax exempt status. And that's why we decided to do this thing. It's not happy history, uh, and it's difficult. If you look to the right, you'll see some of the things that I have highlighted in my own research, and maybe you don't get it, but if you look closely, you're actually seeing some students at the time, some white students at the time, dressed up in blackface. Um, and using very stereotypical and harmful language that would have been said about African Americans now, then, and before then, and the celebration of the Confederate flag moving through Collegedale. And I've put the years there, that's 1960, where you're seeing some of these things happen. It's difficult, but it did happen. This isn't made up. I didn't fabricate information. You can find this yourself if you look through some of those yearbooks. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about this woman. She's a local Florida legend there. Maybe you've heard her beautiful voice. This is the great Gail Jones Murphy. She was elected the first African American and the first woman student association president of Southern Missionary College there in 1976. And she is legendary. She does so many different things before she even gets to Southern. She desegregates two Adventist schools, and the list really goes on. She has inspired the likes of Kirk Franklin with particular songs. She has traveled the world, and she always wants people to know that she loves serving the Lord and that these things did not stop her. These racist incidents that she experienced did not stop her from doing what she thought was right. She even performed next to Coretta Scott King at the 1 year anniversary of Dr. King's death there in Memphis, since Gail Jones Murphy is from Memphis. But after doing so many different things into her childhood and teenagehood and into her early 20s, she graduated from Southern with no job. And the reason why is because when she had had a successful interview with the Hawaii conference, once they realized that she was an African American, they mysteriously chose not to hire her. And they let her know this maybe only 2 weeks before that school year was to start, where she was going to be teaching music. This is still the sort of thing that Black Seventh-day Adventists are dealing with again, over 10 years after the General Conference has said, hey, we need to desegregate this and make sure that employment opportunities are all equal, but it's not even, it's not perfect. And Gail Jones Murphy's story is an example of that. And truly, I hope that while you're there in Florida, that you're able to go into the Orlando area and hear Gail's music, Gail's voice, and you can even look her up on streaming services and listen to her music. She is truly a fantastic person. But up next, Frank W. Hale Jr., Dr. Hale, we talked about him earlier. He has this to say for Spectrum magazine back in 1970. The denomination cannot spread the gospel when there is a continual presence of bitterness, discord, and racism within the organization. He also says this: integration alone is not enough to bridge the gulf of inequality that still exists within the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So understand that even Dr. Hale said this is not just because we've been able to put out policies and statements. That's not the end of the fight for equal representation in the church. It doesn't just leave overnight. And so even though plenty of other things happened into the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and there, excuse me, still some things that I am uncovering as I write my own research, I want to move us a little bit now more so into the 21st century. And I understand that the things that I am about to say could be challenging for you to grip with. But I think they still need to be said, still need to be highlighted, because these are some of the questions that you might have yourself. Now let's move into the 21st century. Wow, who is that? Look at that person in the middle. This is a photo of me and some students when Dr. Dave Smith does something at Southern Adventist University. That was the first time a president like him had ever done something like this. We're going to get into this, but I just want to remind you that some of the next few slides could be explicit. So, maybe don't read them out loud. It's something that Southern students like myself over the past 10 plus years recognize. This is something that I like to call the Yik Yak Affair at Southern Adventist University in February of 2016. So just some background. Yik Yak was, oh, I think it's an app again. I think they've remade it again. But this was an app where you could just post anonymous ideas about anyone and anything according to your Wi-Fi network. So that means, Pastor Jonathan, that while you're speaking in church and giving probably an excellent sermon, your members might be looking at their phones and saying all sorts of terrible things anonymously. How anxiety inducing is that? But some people during this time use this app to empower some racist ideas. And so at a Black Christian Union Vespers in February of 2016, we had a guest speaker from Oakwood University come and give a sermon. But most of this is forgotten because these sorts of tensions erupted on this app. So take a look, you'll see some things that are just so ludicrous. I'm not going to read all of them out loud for obvious reasons, but things like shut up and go eat bananas, or the outdated Negro people don't want to be considered different, but go around saying they have their own national anthem, all kinds of really strange ideas and hurtful ideas from people just choosing to spread whatever they want to say. But after this, Black students, and not just Black students, but Black students, white people as well, Hispanic and Latin American students, so many of them came together to form a plan to present to presidential leadership. And amongst their plan was asking for a multicultural church, maybe a multicultural center, so that we can continue to educate people on these difficult things, and having diversity dialogues and an empathy week where we take the time to learn about each other and our backgrounds, just to name a few. Maybe you've heard of the Merged Church today, but that was an idea that came out of this really sad and frustrating situation. But if you have students who are at Southern today and that you know them, ask them about Merge. Merge is doing some great work today, but it came out of situations like these just in 2016. Now, this one made headlines everywhere. This is It Is Time, AU, Andrews University, February of 2017. A Black History Month speaker for the University Chapel was understood by some to suggest that anyone who voted for the 45th President of the United States should be ashamed of themselves. And a week later, the provost of the school apologized. But Black students responded, arguing that it was time for Andrews to apologize for the racism that it perpetuated on its campus, as it did not reflect the values of Jesus Christ. The students, just like we have done today, talked about the history of what happened at Andrews, segregation in the cafeteria, or lack of ethnic representation among faculty and administration. They challenged the campus to release a formal state of apology for wrongdoing against Black students at the institution, among many other demands. And maybe you've heard this story before, but Andrews, led by Dr. Andrea Luxton, at the time created an Office of Diversity, among many other things. And it looks like my light just decided to die, so I hope that I'm still visible. Let's see how we're looking here. Oh, either way, I'm still visible. So Andrews hires a vice president for diversity, equity, and inclusion. His name is Michael Nixon. They did this all in February of 2017, trying to help the institution understand its harmful, difficult history. And then, of course, not to toot my own horn here at all, but trying to help you understand that this was the sort of work that even I was doing a couple of years ago that still had to be done at Southern Adventist University. So even, I just want to say this, even if you're not hired in places like these and you feel like, what am I supposed to do? I don't work at this school or anything like that. Well, I think it's all of our jobs to remind ourselves of who Adventists were and who our pioneers were, and to continue to challenge and to make sure that everybody has a place in our Seventh-day Adventist Church. So here's a couple of the things that I was really hoping to do and did all at the same time. And I'll let you read through those and take a second there. But if you look on the right, you'll see the wonderful Natalia Perez Gonzalez, who is someone that you all got to meet a month ago, now my fiance. She, as her role in editor in chief for the Southern Accent, which is the student newspaper, was able to lead her team in creating a race relations timeline at Southern and helping us all see how over time we have we didn't allow Black students for a long time, and now we did, but then there are some other things that we just missed that we didn't know about before. And Dr. David Smith, who was our president at the time, right after Dr. Gordon Beats, had pulled me into his office after a particularly hurtful moment when I'm going to discuss something that's hard, but when a student who wasn't even supposed to be on campus had come to our school and posted something really, really harmful on social media. And I responded to it. And after that, Dr. Smith was like, well, Philip, what can we do? What else should we be doing to help our institution just reckon with this legacy? And I said, well, maybe we need to film a video that really discusses just a formal apology and a Christ centered uh, method forward for moving about these things. And he said, you know what? I think that's the right thing to do. And so this is that iconic moment. Dr. Smith, along with other administrators, are apologizing for some of the racist things that nobody had ever really talked about before and saying, you know what, we're going to hire a vice president of DEI moving forward so that we can continue to have these dialogues and keep making Southern a place where all people can be a part of. And of course, like you and I are discussing today, to remember our Adventist pioneers. So I'm not going to continue to berate that, but I'm going to show you an image of what that band student had posted on social media. And this is it. Yes, that word is there. It's not bleeped out, nothing. This was posted across Snapchat. And it was very difficult and harmful for students to see, as what you're actually looking at are students represented from all over the Black diaspora, um, countries within the African continent, the Caribbean, and of course the United States are all celebrating by wearing the flags of their heritage as people clapped, seeing their own selves represented there on a campus where they are a minority. But this student chose to sully this celebration. And elsewhere in Adventist higher education, we're seeing, unfortunately, things like this, even at Walla Walla University. This is 2018 when you have the Black Panther. So that's probably why you're seeing Wakanda there. But this was a very harmful thing for Black students to see, that people were dressing up and putting blackface on their faces and not realizing how damaging that was for Black students to see. And so now I have to ask us, where do we go from here? You're probably wondering, all right, well, thank you for sharing all of the not so great things, even from the 40s and all the way up to the 2010s, and now we're in the 2020s. So, what do we do with all of this? Chaos or community? That is a question that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. asked in his final monograph before he was assassinated. But I like to have this conversation about public work and memory. So, I want to ask you a question. I hope you write this down. I hope that you and Pastor Jonathan really convene and think about these things. But it's something that we call restorative justice. What can you do to honor trailblazers who represent the Adventist Church's highest goals as it pertains to race and culture in your community? How do you honor people? Who do you choose to honor and why? In the example of Lucy Byard, remember her? We talked about her already now, almost an hour ago. um, we talked about how Lucy Byard's passing, her untimely death, led to was the primary catalyst that led to regional conferences in our church and the great things that are happening there. And so when Adventist healthcare, as it's called up here in the DMV area, DC, Maryland, Virginia area, when they started to manage the Howard University Hospital, which used to be called Freedman's Hospital, when they realized that, oh man, we can't just step into this place and now manage it and not acknowledge how we, as we used to be called Washington Sanitarium, sent an African American Adventist down there to die. We can't just come in and take over without acknowledging what we've done. So here's what they did. In 2021, they created some scholarships for students of limited financial means who have demonstrated necessary skills, character, and commitment to the field of nursing. They called this the Lucy Byard Scholarship, and then unveiled this portrait. And the woman next to Lucy Byard's portrait here is a direct descendant of Lucy Byard. So these things you might think happened so long ago, but we have descendants of these people who had such terrible ordeals in our church and in our community. And there are still ways to say, we're sorry. and to do better now moving forward, because that is the Adventist message. Now, here's an article that I wrote a couple of years ago. This is Anna Knight and the Case for Reparations. You might remember I told you the story of Anna Knight not too long ago. She was the first Black student ever at Graysville Academy, which became Southern Adventist University, but she was not allowed to attend the school past her first day. And so I said to the university, how about we consider ways to commemorate Anna Knight and other Black legacies on that campus? But unfortunately, the institution has decided not to do any of that, and there isn't anything actually named on Southern's campus for an African American or many women at all. But this is the sort of work that we continue to do in our local communities, to think about who came before and to think about how to honor and remember them and to challenge ourselves to be better. Here's another example. You might know who Dr. Gordon Beats is there on the left, but that on the right is Dr. Delbert Baker. And if you know Dr. Benjamin Baker, this is Dr. Ben Baker's father, Delbert Baker, who was the president of Oakwood University in the 90s and early 2000s. They created this program called DEEP, Diversity Education Exchange Program. You should note, especially if you're a Southern alumni, that Southern and Oakwood are like this on the map, especially compared to other schools that are just so far from each other. And with such storied legacies, Southern being for a long time, a whites only school, and Oakwood being a historically Black college university, that relationship can be frayed. And so in the 90s, these two presidents considered ways to ensure that we can continue to have interracial dialogues and discussions by having students from those different institutions spend a whole semester at each other's sister campuses and getting to understand new cultures and experiences that we just used to take for granted before. Excuse me. That program is continued now for one day. It's called Deep Sabbath. But in some ways, what it used to do was a little bit more involved. And this is just another example of something that we can be doing today. Black Adventist minister Charles Dudley once advocated for interracial Sabbaths, where one pastor from a regional church and a pastor from a state church would switch pulpits. Today, we can take these plans and think about them and move forward. I mean, we especially should probably find ways together to support local Adventist education together. I say that on purpose because I know Newport Richie, you all have a great church school attached to you, and there are probably new ways to consider some collaboration with others if you haven't considered them already. And do we keep regional conferences? This is a question I hear all the time, but I just want to remind you that regional conferences in the 21st century continue to do the work that they were originally started to do back in 1944, and it's led to an explosion of growth in Black Adventist work. So you should know that as the overall population of Adventism declines in North America as a whole, African Americans are still joining the church and they're joining regional conferences. So the regional conference system, even if you're thinking, well, isn't this segregation? Not necessarily. They are still on the same level, still doing that same work. And there are still ways that we can continue to collaborate and do that work together. But it is clearly working, and Black Adventists are able to do that work with their own personnel, and it's looking good for them. But I want us, as we close now, to consider this Adventist fundamental belief. You've probably seen our 28 fundamental beliefs, but this in 1980 was number 13. It's now number 14. And this is a unity in the body of Christ. And I apologize for the different fonts I chose here. The church is one body with many members called from every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. In Christ, we are a new creation. Distinctions of race, culture, learning, and nationality, and differences between high and low, rich and poor, male and female, must not be divisive among us. We are all equal in Christ, who by one Spirit has bonded us into one fellowship with Him and with one another. We are to serve and be served without partiality or reservation. And through the revelation of Jesus Christ in the scriptures, we share the same faith and hope and reach out in one witness to all. Let us remember our true selves as we look into the future and remember who we're supposed to take this third angel's message to, and this revolutionary idea of the Sabbath and rest, and resting in the fact that Jesus Christ is coming again, where these things will matter to him, sure. But once we get to heaven, it's going to be a new experience, a new culture, a new creed, a new nation. This is one of my favorite Bible verses, and I thought that I would share it with it today. And this is coming from the Clear Word version of the Bible, the paraphrase. Our faces are no longer covered, and as we look at the glory of the Lord, we are changed. We reflect more and more of his image by the power of his Spirit working on our hearts. Now that we've rediscovered who we really are, can we be transformed? Can we be as radical as our pioneers? This isn't just a work for Black people to do. This isn't just a message for Black Adventists to remind ourselves, oh, look at what a great job we've done. This is a mission for everyone. The Great Commission applies to all of us. And it's something that all people who share this Adventist heritage need to remember. Remember the voices of our pioneers, but also remember the voices of those who in the 50s and 60s challenged us to really live up to those ideals and goals. Even though, yes, in 1965, the General Conference said we need to stop this segregation, this idea that Black people can't be seen at a hospital and can't join this church and can't go to this school. We're going to stop that. We've seen over time how we still have some issues that we still need to work out. We've seen that we have forgotten some radical ideas about who we are as Seventh-day Adventists, who were against slavery, who were against Jim Crow segregation, but we've backslid just a little bit. And progress doesn't always look like this. It's not an even, perfect line. Sometimes it looks a little bit like this. And we need to keep our minds, our hearts on Christ and to continue to study because Jesus, as I always want to remind us, Jesus is coming soon. And we have to make sure that we remember who we are, not just to our Adventist education, heritage, and whether we eat good haystacks or not and eat little Debbie's or something like that, but we need to remember who we are to Jesus Christ. And with that, I want to say, after a month, thank you so much for having me, Newport Richey Seventh-day Adventist Church. Thank you for being attentive, for being a part of this, for inviting me here to share this with you. And I hope that we can continue to dialogue and to grow together. Happy Sabbath, and I'm here for questions. And if you want to unmute and show your face, you can do that too. And I don't promise that I will know every single answer that you might have, but I might know the scholars who do and produce this work who can help you dig a little bit deeper because that's what we need to be doing. So thank you so much, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Philip. This is Pastor Jonathan. Thank you, Philip, for just amazing presentation. Now, I was taking notes while you were lecturing, so I mean, I kind of have a lot of questions myself, but I don't want to take up all the time because me and you we can always dialogue on the side. But is there anyone else who has questions that they would like to ask Philip about what they heard here today? And if not, then I'm going to ask my question. So just, give you guys some time to, and remember to unmute yourself if you do have a question.
So I have a question. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Hi there. My name is Carmelita Winters. And my one question that I just keep lingering with me is before Jesus comes, Pastor Phillip, and I know that's not your official name or title, but do you believe that the conferences will be integrated, that we will all be one big conference and we won't have all the regional conference here? And, do you think we're going to come together before Jesus comes? I think my question it really it just stems from this whole idea or thought that how can we as individual conferences, how can we, we believe that Jesus is coming to save all of us, but do we believe that we're going to be able to live happily together in the kingdom when the togetherness here on earth is not always evident among Seventh-day Adventists?
An excellent question, and it's difficult. I know that many people take certain sides on this thing, and my own personal upbringing, I was kind of born and raised within regional conferences for half my life, and then the other half was spent more so a little bit on the state side of things. I will just say, I'll refer back to what I said close to the end that Black conferences continue to do the work. It is working, whereas the rest of the church in North America is declining. The Black Adventist work continues to rise because I think there's something to be said. They would probably argue that the ability to have their own personnel and finances go to specific needs in their ministry without having to say to someone who may not be of their culture, hey, this matters within our church or within our culture, and we need to allocate funds to that. Because for years, I think the first really 50 years or so of Adventism was spent that way, of the constant, hey, this matters to our community, and we're not able to do this. Because we have that historical legacy, I feel like it would be a very difficult thing to see one complete conference, not based off of, if you will, spiritual matters, but more so you have to also consider who's going to lose their jobs. And I hate to say it that way, but it's a very real thing. If you do become one big conference again, because these conferences, they overlap in territory and things like that, who's going to be still the president, and likely who's it going to be based off of the historical legacy that we have, not just in the United States, but also in the Adventist Church. And before Jesus comes, do I see us becoming one conference? That's such a difficult question, and I hate it if I may not be able to answer it completely to what you might like. But here's what I will say: that I think that it is up to us as individuals, as you were saying towards the end. How can we happily live happily together in the kingdom if it seems like we are so separate? Well, I would say that we are not necessarily separate by a law or something like that as we were years ago. But what we can be doing together is doing more interracial work, interracial dialogue. There should be more overlap in everyday programs and experiences. We should be doing far more of that, and continuing that work. And perhaps there's a conversation for years later of whatever needs to happen with this conference system. But I would say that especially we need to be continuing to do the work firstly interpersonally, with, I guess, strategically doing this together, exchanging pulpits and that sort of thing. I think there's real space for that.
Thank you. I really appreciate your response. And I also want to just say that I really appreciate the work that you're doing, that you've done, the research that you've done. And I appreciate your sharing with the Newport Richey area. And I'm excited that you, I don't know what your plans are, what your future looks like, but I feel like within the Adventist community that this is definitely a message that needs to go around the world so that it does create a deeper understanding of, you know, the kinds of things that African Americans have had to deal with within the Adventist Church and just in the world at large. And I think that another thing that you didn't quite address, and it's okay, because I know this work that you're doing is ongoing. But one of the things that I've read about, I've experienced, because I am a product of Adventist education. I went to Adelphian Academy during a time when there probably were about 50 Blacks at the time out of around 300 students. I know Pastor Helm's daughter, Dr. Hill's daughter. We went to school together at Andrews University. I believe that she calls herself Ifama Kwesi now.
That's right.
Yeah. And so we were, during a time when I was at Andrews University and I was really contemplating the ministry, she was actually there working, I think Ifama was she might have been working on a PhD. I don't remember. It was either a PhD or master's degree. And I was contemplating going into the ministry. And I would talk to her about the possibilities of it and what she had to deal with as a Black woman in the seminary. And so there was that conversation, but I think that one of the things that, I don't know if you would give some thought or time, if you haven't already, which you probably have, is just the for lack of a better word, all I can think of right now is triggers. The triggers that racial toxicity can have for Black people within the Adventist church or in the Adventist community at large. Can you address that in any way?
Sure. So I guess the question is more so, how do we address the triggers that Black Adventists might feel within the church?
Well, it's not so. I think the question is, I think there needs to be an understanding amongst the people that Black people can be triggered by activity that they see that for them represents racism within the Adventist church or organization. Like those triggers can exist for us and how we might respond. I don't know that people are very have no understanding about, because they don't have an understanding about our history. They often don't understand why we might respond in certain ways when we, because sometimes we're very vigilant. We can see things that other people don't recognize. We recognize racism before anyone else may. And so sometimes that can cause triggers. But just the understanding that racism over generations and generations of time, how it impacts the Black psyche and even the social connotations related to it.
Absolutely. You ask a great question, and I'm already thinking of some scholars who have done some of the work, like The Body Keeps the Score is another book that I often see that addresses that. And, the ideas of microaggressions. These are things that really diversity officers, of course, in Florida, that is a difficult thing these days, to say the least. But many diversity, equity, and inclusion officers, once they get to some of our Adventist college campuses, are active in that work, in considering the ways that Black and Brown students might be triggered or harmed by maybe it's an interaction they had with a professor in class. Like, for example, I had a professor who in 19th century American literature, reading Huckleberry Finn, enjoyed his liberal use of the N-word in class, and then turned to me, the only Black student in the class, and said, "It is completely okay for me to use this, right? Because I'm using it in context." And he continued to say that N-word very loudly and very clearly. And there wasn't a place for me to go and say, "Hey, this really bothers me. What do I do about this?" And so while I may not have a complete concrete answer to give you, I would say that that is a piece of why I would say that we need to continue to invest in these positions of equity and inclusion, so that those professionals who study this sort of thing can not only just partner with historians like me and say, "Here's the history and why people are feeling the way that they are." Now we need to form plans and ideas to make sure that these students are empowered, and that other students, faculty, staff, professors, others, they don't continue to make these harmful mistakes. This is a part of the reason why I would argue that these positions matter and that we shouldn't get rid of them. Our church needs it, especially with such a sensitive racial history. And you raise a great question.
Thank you. I have more, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation. So I will stop talking. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for your questions. I appreciate you.
Can I say something here, Carmelita? Thank you for that last question because, not being Black myself, that is something I wouldn't even have been aware of, triggers, if you wouldn't have shared that. And so for me, I feel it's a blessing because now we're learning even more. So I want to thank you for that. Is there anyone else that has other questions or comments? And remember to unmute yourself. If not, I have some questions.
Go ahead and ask your question, Pastor. I'm trying to figure out how I'm gonna formulate my question.
Okay. All right. Very good. And who was that? Who just said that?
That's me, Mark.
Oh, Mark. Okay, thanks. Yes, and that's another thing too. Remember to identify yourself when you ask the questions. This is Pastor Jonathan. Phillip. Yeah, I have a lot of questions. Phillip, how much time do you have? For
It is still the Sabbath, and so I have no work that I need to hurry up and do. I'm just enjoying the Sabbath with you this afternoon.
Okay. All right. So I do have a few questions. Let me from the presentation. Let me start here. Before you mentioned, about regional conferences. What year were they developed, or did they begin to be developed?
Yes, that's 1944.
Okay, in the 1940s. So before the regional conferences were established, how did Black Seventh-day Adventists interact with, I don't want to say white Adventists, but places like camp meeting or, things like this? Was it segregated? How was that experience? Yeah.
Excellent question. And yes, you've answered your own question. In many of these conferences, it was a segregated experience. This really begins I am trying to think, is that 1876, 1880s? Charles M. Kinney, who often is called the father of Black Adventism, he's there in Tennessee at a camp meeting. And they're like, we love what you're doing, but we think that because we're in the South and it's upsetting local people, not as many people are coming out to camp meeting because they don't like the idea of race mixing. So it might be best for you, one, to continue to work among your own people, but Black Adventists are going to need to sit in the very back of these tent meetings for camp meeting and things like that. So through camp meeting, at least, yes, racial segregation was there, and even into 1900s, 10s, 20s, 30s. And they had the same sort of chart of command, if you will. And so this is what I mean about the whole regional conferences and why they're important, because from 1944 on, you really have this ability to say, we have an issue in our church, it's important, or racial matter came up, and you could talk to someone who would understand that because they were a Black Seventh-day Adventist and they were president of a regional conference, and there's an understanding. In the past, and I talked about this about a month ago, you had some Black Adventists who were trying to do social uplift programs, and instead they were getting in trouble with state conferences with white male leadership, who also did not want other Black people in charge in the conference office at all. And when, for example, there was a Negro department that was developed in 1909 by the General Conference, they had one Black man who did a lot of that work. And he literally worked himself to death. He had a heart attack at a pretty young age from just running around and trying to do every single, if you will, Black errand across the North American division. A crazy schedule. He really just believed, of course, in the Adventist message, but it was entirely too much for one person. And so that even did not work. And I realized for everyone that I did not address the fact that there are no regional conferences on the West Coast. Efforts were made in the 70s, 80s, 90s, even Black unions and that sort of thing. And you can read more about that in Dr. Calvin B. Rock's book here. Um, Strongly recommend that, but there are not any over there. So in that place, they have things like offices of minority affairs, and that's how they do that on the West Side.
Philip here, Pastor Jonathan again. You mentioned Dr. Calvin Rock, and he did a podcast with our field secretary here at the Florida Conference talking about his book, and I think it would be very helpful. Maybe I'll send that link out to our church members because he discusses about his book and different topics. I just want to kind of throw that out there. Another question I have about Dr. Hayes, is it, who you said he helped to desegregate Union College? I was born in Lincoln, Nebraska, and so that does intrigue me there. What role did he, like what office, I guess, or administrative role or position did he have there at Union College to be able to affect that change there?
Yes, this is what I love about Dr. Hale, Dr. Frank W. Hale. He does this as a student, actually. From a very young age, Dr. Hale was interested in racial matters, to put it that way. He just wanted to make sure that he could stand up as a man wherever he was. And his parents really imbibed this idea into him. Dr. Hale, as young as even in high school, when he was in high school in Topeka, Kansas, had advocated for racial segregation stopping at his public high school. And so by the time that he was a student at Oakwood first, and then he ended up going up back to Nebraska at Union. He noticed that there are these sorts of policies. And with other Black students, he said, enough is enough. He wrote letters. He just did the work as a student to say that this was wrong, and wrote and had direct communication with administration. And that is how that came to be. I have his book here on my shelf. It is a rarity. It is called Angels Watching Over Me. It is out of print. It was published back in 1996. But he talks a lot about that. And you'll find some of that in my article for the Encyclopedia of Seventh-day Adventist here pretty soon.
Thank you, Philip. All right, anyone else? Mark, did you figure out how to formulate your question?
Yeah, I got my question that I'm gonna ask. Um Philip, well, first off, Philip, I want to say congratulations on your engagement. I saw that
Thank you.
online. So congratulations on that, my man. But so pardon me if you covered this, I kind of came on here a little late. But could you go ahead and we talked about how the regional conference formed out of the horribleness of what happened. And then so can you speak to the fact that even though although once regional conference came about, the pay discrepancy that there was between African American pastors and versus their white counterparts, and also as far as the retirement aspect, the discrepancies that were happening then at that time as well.
That is an excellent question, and I am actually struggling a little bit to remember some of how that came to me. And I know that I'm not going to put my grandmother on the spot at all. She is here supporting me today. But my grandmother, I think, told me about some meetings that happened around 2000 or so, when in talking about the ways that pastors and Black regional conference members were not paid equitably, a plan was made that their retirement would be, if you will, more than state conferences, I suppose, to offset some of that. And I can't talk about that as technically as I would like, but I will say that at least you can absolutely find that here in this book. It is the last chapter that Dr. C.B. Rock spends a lot of time discussing how that came to be. Unfortunately, that is not something I know as much as I should about, but I thank you for that question.
Okay, that's cool.
Well, thank you, Mark. Are there any other questions? I have more questions. Unless we do we want to say 5:30? Do we want to say we want to wrap it up at 5:30? Do you think that's fair?
Sure, sure. I'm here. I'm open. I have nowhere to go for the rest of the day.
Can you hear us right now?
Yes, we can hear you.
And okay, my wife's got a question.
I don't have a question because there's a lot of them, but I grew up, I'm a third generation Adventist, but I'm from
Wow.
the Northwest. And uh, we in the Northwest, at least where I grew up in Walla College, College Place area, I don't remember any of this as a child because there were no Black people
Yeah.
in our area. Now, when I moved to Alaska with my parents, we had one Black woman, and there were only 5 of us in Sitka that opened that church up. And I never felt anything about Black people different than white people. So either I'm very unusual, and I've never lived in an area where there's a lot of Black people, except in this wonderful church here. And half of our church or more are Black. And I don't think of them as any different, but I do realize, that I think that's more central down here than it was in the Northwest where I grew up. Because to me, Black people are more, what should I say? I think they're just so colorful. I think they are just beautiful people. They're more outspoken than a lot of us white people because we are more English. Seems like we don't really sometimes share exactly who we are, which Pastor Jonathan is talking about. Who are you? So I must have been in the dark ages when it came to the Black. Except I realized what was happening here because my husband was raised in St. Petersburg when the Black people had to sit in the back of the bus and the white people sat in the front and all this. But this is really an eye opener for me, being an Adventist for all these years. And I just really want to thank you for all the information, because I don't have a question for you. I can't think of it. I think you've answered all my questions, but I just wanted to say that I think it was really an eye opener for me as an Adventist, not being raised in an area where we thought any different of Black people versus white people or Chinese people, or you pick your nationality. But thank you so much.
Well,
All
I'm
right.
thank you for that comment. I really appreciate that. And yeah, that is interesting. In fact, in my research, I'm finding that in the Northwest, actually, especially in Oregon and Washington, there were laws that excluded Black people from even living in the state. And that's a part of it, that you don't have African Americans out there historically because, first of all, they were excluded, couldn't even live out there for the longest time. And that's still something, a legacy, if you will, from that time that we still just, we're not going to be out there. And it's a good thing that you pointed that out. And especially a place like Alaska, there's not many of us out there. But I'm thankful that you found something new, that you were, and that you see people for who they are. Human people. We all have stories, and there are legacies of the United States that affect us differently. That is true. And especially living in the South, where all of you all are there in Florida, things are, the legacies are especially inherent and apparent in society. But I'm thankful that at least on the Adventist side, we're starting to learn a little bit more about our own legacies, and how they intertwine with what's happening in our everyday life and culture here in the United States. Thank you.
Did you want to
Pastor Warfield, this is Carmelita again. I had something came to mind as I was listening to the woman that just spoke and had a question and comments about her upbringing and all, and I appreciate your response to that. But it made me think about a quote. I don't know if everybody or anybody, and I'm sure you are familiar with Ruby Bridges. Um, So Ruby Bridges was just like the Little Rock Nine, was a first grader
Yes.
that desegregated, was part of that desegregation of a school in her hometown. And for the life of me, I can't remember what town it is right now.
I think
Um,
it may be New Orleans or Baton Rouge. It's Louisiana.
Louisiana, that's right. But there's a quote that I recently read. I recently had my students do Black history presentations. I teach first and second grade at the Newport Richey Adventist School.
Excellent.
And yes, and all of my students did a presentation, and one of them did a presentation on Ruby Bridges. And there was a quote by her that really stands out to me. I took several pictures of it. Uh, uh, I guess I'd never thought about this in its totality, although I have thought about it. But it said that racism is a grown-up problem.
Mm,
Um, So let's not pass it on to our children.
mm.
And I just felt like, wow, that's what that little first grader came up with, although she's a grown woman now, she just celebrated her, I think it's 65th birthday or so. I don't know, but she's up there.
Yeah.
But I thought, yeah, this is so true that racism is a grown-up problem, and therefore how do we not pass it on to our children, except that we as the grown-ups have to move past that place.
Definitely. It's such a challenging thing because we also don't want to raise our children in ignorance of what is still happening in the United States today. Um, but we do have a responsibility to teach them, if you will, the standards of the Bible, the fruit of the Spirit, being kind to other people, loving our neighbors as ourselves, and acknowledging that, yes, in the past, people didn't treat people well because of their beliefs about the color of someone's skin, but that doesn't mean that you have to go and repeat those mistakes. And as long as, we teach history, but we also teach what Jesus has to say about treating other people uh, well. I think that we're on our way. And I'm grateful that you are teaching there at the school, and that somebody thought to include Ruby Bridges, whom, you're right, she hasn't even reached her 70th birthday yet. And Dr. Terrence Roberts, who I talked about today, I think he's barely 82. And that photo that I showed of he and I shaking hands together, I think he was maybe 75, 76 or so back then. And he is still completely in charge of his mental faculties and shares these sorts of stories all the time. And so, yes, at the same time, these things aren't just history. These are people who are living and walking among us today. And the black and white photos might make you think that it's 100 years ago, but it wasn't. It's very close to our time period now.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Philip, and just, also going back to Dolly's question, or in comment, Dolly, thank you for sharing that. I think for me, being Hispanic and being an immigrant Hispanic, a lot of this is also new for us because as an immigrant Hispanic coming to the United States, kind of our focus and our energy is kind of elsewhere, right? But this aspect of even Black Adventist history is even new to me. And I'm a little bit embarrassed to even admit that, because I have my doctorate, but in all of the Adventist history courses we ever took at the seminary, I went to Southern, we never hear about Black Adventist history. And
Yes.
so I think, Philip, you gave a recommendation about incorporating, some of this in our history courses, but I really don't even know how much our Adventist professors know about Black Adventist history either to be able to teach it. So it's not just, I want to say it's not just Nita Dolly. I mean, as a pastor myself, Black Adventist history is completely new to me. I just started learning about this just a couple of years ago.
And you know what? I'm so glad that you shared that. And because number one, the leadership to be able to say, as someone with a PhD, I did not learn this. As I pursue my PhD, it feels as though there are some people who just feel as though once they have the doctorate that they know everything there is to know about a subject. So to be able to have the intellectual humility to be able to say, I don't know everything and we should know more. First of all, wanted to commend you for being open to being able to say that. And two, yes, I just made an argument actually in Spectrum myself, asking for us to expand what Adventist heritage courses look like. And Pastor Jonathan, I know that you're a fellow Southern alumni, so you might remember that Adventist heritage, the way that it's taught to us, goes up to about 1915. And what happens in 1915? Ellen G. White passes away, and boom, we're done. But that was 109. Am I mathing right? Yes, 109 or so years ago. Clearly, there is so much that we have not talked about. And this isn't hearsay. This isn't me just making up things. I can point you to every single source that I use to give these three presentations. And a lot of these sources are not, I don't know, 3 years old or 4 or 5 years old. Some of them are 40. Some of them are 30 years old. It's there. We just need to do a much better job in our, especially in Seventh-day Adventist education, in saying that, hey, if you're going to be a teacher teaching church history or history in general, or be a part of this theology department, we need to understand the perspectives of what our non-white members have been through. So I look forward to reading as more historians come up and they read and they write things on just, I don't know, maybe it is the story of the immigrants in the Seventh-day Adventist Church and what they have given to maybe the North American Adventist Church in some way. There are just so many different frameworks to consider the work that others have done. And we just need to continue to do a much better job, and especially not limit these discussions to regional spaces, and not let, and not, if you will, allow Oakwood to feel like they are the only ones that have to share this. We should all be engaging in this difficult history and partnering with regional conferences in Oakwood and everybody else to continue to get this out into the public, because the scholars have done the work. We need to keep doing the work ourselves.
I'm glad you said that, Phil. This is Mark again. Because I'm an Oakwood alum. And so when I was at Oakwood, I remember I had a professor in my Adventist history class, named Dr. Sepulveda. I think his first name was Surreal Sepulveda. And he wrote a book, and I mean he covered a lot of the things that you covered, and he covers that, and he goes into one of the things that I appreciated about his course was that he spoke about some of our mishaps as an Adventist church, with even within the dealings with blacks and African Americans here in the United States. But then he also talks about, our history, and some of our victories and some of our failures overseas.
Yes.
Some of the victories and failures, some of the failures that we've had, like in Africa, some of the victories and failures that we had in South America, some of the victories and failure that we had, like even in the Philippines and in the Asia Pacific area as well. And I think what happens is sometimes we get an expectation of, not even an expectation, I think we get the notion that if something is going, that history, when history is reported, then that's all the history that's being, that must be, they're giving you the full synopsis of all the history that has happened. And so
Right.
if something didn't happen, if something is not reported, then they would have said, then if they didn't say nothing, then that means it must not have happened. And I remember being younger. I can't remember where I heard the quote from though, but it's like history is written by the victor.
Right.
Usually the victor is the one that champions and writes the history of the ones that we are reading. And if you look at in the course of here in the United States, who is the one, who is typically the ones that are, who you would say is the victor, and there's usually usually our white counterparts are the one that's writing the history. That usually there's our white counterparts that's writing the history of the Asian encounters here on the West Coast, on the on the railroad is usually the white history is usually the one that's right a lot of times writing African American history or telling the story of the African American history. And so a lot of times if you want to know if you a lot of times if you want to go more in depth and actually understand the true history, some of the true history or some of the history that's not being reported, you might have to go to and speak to the people who went through it so that you can
Yes.
actually understand what actually happened. Because if you think about it, like I always think about it, me and my wife talk about like even like going around the holiday of Thanksgiving and growing up and what we thought about Thanksgiving, and everything, oh, it's the first meal with the Native Americans and we're learning how to farm and it's the first harvest and all that stuff. And then if you go and imagine if you were to go and talk about Thanksgiving and you go speak to Native Americans and what is their perspective on Thanksgiving, we might get a different perspective,
Right. Right.
and then you have to ask yourself, then why are they preaching it over this way, on this side? 'Cause a lot of times people don't want to paint themselves in a certain light, when reporting the history. So I think, like you said, like Oakwood regional work, they're reporting some of the history that's there as well. But if all true historians would take history from both sides, and for my synopsis of what occurred and everything. So I appreciate your work and what you're doing from that standpoint.
Thank you, thank you. You bring up excellent points, and that's what I came to Howard University to learn. For a long time, I was, just given maybe a history textbook or something like that, and I could repeat to you facts and things like that. But learning how to think a little bit more critically about the kinds of history that we teach and the kinds of history, even that's in an archive and what's recorded and what's not, has become part of my job as a graduate student to think a little bit more deeply about. And so, for example, the reason why some of those portions about the Adventist higher education were not as, filled out with all these beautiful bullet points is because my research is ongoing. You cannot find a lot of this specifically in an archive. I am going and I'm talking to people. I'm right here like this on Zoom talking with 80-year-olds about what they experienced 30, 40 years ago, 20 years ago for some people, because it's not in a history book. It wasn't reported on at all. And that's what historians do. We make sure that we dig and we look in one archive and we check another archive and then we hear from people's learned experience and we record it. That's what helps us make history that is something that is accessible for everybody. And I recognize, of course, that you all are in Florida, and I'm just going to say that this is a place in which right now being able to teach African American history can be difficult. Because people are saying that this perspective of the way that you're teaching history is not something I'm comfortable with. Therefore, I want to ban it. And we need to do our best as Seventh-day Adventists to do it ourselves in our own communities, to teach the history that we weren't taught, to find the history, to understand how to go about searching for sources and making sure that those, frankly, non-white voices are also held up in the history archive and to share those as well, even if a local government tells you that that's not true history. We have to do our best to think critically. So I thank you for that comment. That was great.
Phil, this is James. We're tuning in from Orlando. Thanks so much. Enjoyed this a lot. I had a question, and maybe this is something you touched on in one of your previous parts. This is the first one we're tuning in on, but have you uncovered what specific reasons the Adventist Church was so opposed to integrating? It's just strange to me. Clearly, I'm sure it wasn't coincidence or chance. There must be something about the Adventist Church or the legacy or the specific people that just made them so much more opposed to integrating than other churches at the time.
Yes, great question, James. And Thank you, you and Shana, for joining today. Friends, these are my friends, James and Shana, who are tuning in also from the Florida, Orlando area, and we went to university together. So I just wanted to shout you all out and say thank you. But yes, why would the Adventist Church be so opposed to this idea of integration? Well, to think about that, we also, firstly, I'll try to do this as quickly as I can, but remembering that one, the Adventist pioneers were all about ending slavery. And they were very much active in anti-slavery work, and that is very much well documented. Ellen White, Joseph Bates, all these other people were writing against slavery, and in the Civil War said this is a terrible thing, and that enslaved people need to be freed. And so you get that, and then you get into the 1890s, and in the 1890s in the United States, you're being introduced to Plessy v. Ferguson. That is a Supreme Court decision that says that we.
I mean, I feel like they
were downsizing maybe.
Yeah, they're down, but I feel like they deal in different things though. I feel like the one on Del Mabry is a little bit more towards like production, like doing a lot more like production stuff. Like you have to get like a big old stage area with lights and.
Unmuted here. Well, so Plessy v. Ferguson, we get that separate but equal clause in which Black Americans are now deemed second-class citizens, unfortunately. And now you get introduced to segregation laws in the South, Jim Crow, poll taxes, etc. And the Adventist Church is saying, well, in order to maybe protect some of our work and still minister to white people without upsetting them at the same time, because enslaved people or formerly enslaved people also need this message, we should start to do it separately until the Lord shows us a better way. And as we move into this era, what we call the nadir, a low point in American race relations, into the first decade of the 1900s and into the 1910s, Ellen White dies, and some of her last testimonies that she writes in Volume 9, when she is saying, let the colored brethren realize that this is supposed to be the way until the Lord shows us another way. People took that and essentially canonized it. They said that, oh, well, Ellen White said this in 1904, 1905, and so we're going to keep doing it. And so I didn't have enough time to get into every single individual story, but as you move into the 50s and the 1960s, as Black people start trying to go into white churches, for example, the Huntsville Central Seventh-day Adventist Church there in Huntsville, Alabama, some Black students from Oakwood try to go over, and a pastor literally gets up. He stops his sermon midway through, opens up. It's like he had it on deck or something, but he opens up or just reads Ellen G. White, Testimonies to the Church, Volume 9, and says, this is not supposed to happen. Clearly, you don't belong here. And goes into Noah's curse and all of that, and then asks those Black students to leave. It all goes back to one, segregation is a way of life in the United States, and the Seventh-day Adventist Church over 70 years just said, you know what, fair enough. And they also took Ellen G. White's writings out of context. She was talking about a very dangerous time, a time of lynching and things like that, and decided to use that and essentially make it into a creed. And they made it into a policy that said that Black people should not be allowed in those spaces. And that mixture is what allowed the Seventh-day Adventist Church to just continue to practice separate but equal between Ellen White and the United States government, and between this movement that I talked about a month ago called fundamentalism in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, where Adventists were very afraid of being imprisoned by the federal government for not being American enough. And so in order to try to fit in with other denominations, they lost some of their radical ideas about socio-political ideas in the United States. They lost a lot of them to try to fit in. And in fitting in, they introduced some hurtful things socially. And that is, I tried to make it the short version, but it ended up being a little bit long. But that is the quicker version of that story. That's a great question, James.
Phil, this is Mark again.
That's
from the
very interesting. Thank you.
So Philip, when you came here, you spoke about how during Ellen White's time, where like they were very radical. The church was radical at one point, as far as going against the grain as how with the government and everything. But then I remember At a certain point, there was a trend when now some of the outside influences of the world started creeping up into the church. And so one of the things that I remember one of my professors told us about was one of the contexts of Ellen White when she spoke about as far as like why when she told people not to go to the theaters, it was like a lot of times the people from the church were going to the theaters and they would be seeing this blackface and they were portraying African Americans as individuals, and now the people in the church just started adopting some of the ideologies of the world by going to some of these places. And then so by those tests, Ellen White under the context was saying, you know what, we should not be going to these places, the theaters, for those particular reasons. So because of those type of things, Ellen White gave her consult on some of those stuff because our church was starting to adopt some of the world view of how things should be in the perceptions of African Americans.
Yeah, that's definitely a major idea, as well as, of course, theaters 120 years ago were spaces of debauchery. There's some strange things happening in movie theaters 120 years ago. And of course, social things have changed over time in a myriad of different ways. But you're right. Ellen White, of course, she died in 1915, but also that year, one of the biggest films of all time that was shown in the White House down the street from me during President Wilson's time period was 1915's Birth of a Nation, which really helped spark the emergence of the second wave of the Ku Klux Klan, which was at its most powerful into the 1920s. In fact, there is documented evidence that we have Seventh-day Adventist elders of prominent churches and pastors who were members of the KKK. There are reasons why maybe Ellen White would have been saying, maybe in those first Nickelodeons, and not the channel, but the 5-cent movies that one would have been able to watch in maybe the late 1900s, early 1910s before her death. Maybe this is a reason why you might want to stay away from theaters because it does not re-edify the prophetic message and the revolutionary message of this is what people are supposed to be depicted as, and not this lost cause idea of what an African American is supposed to look like and be like. I have not read that article, so I can't speak specifically to it, but I'm just saying that the reasoning, I can understand it, and there's some historical information as to why.
All right, very good. Is there anyone else, or should we wrap it up?
Question. This is Beth. I was just wondering if you have any history books you think that we should have the kids read so that they learn the real history.
Yes, I love that question. How I have to ask, depends on the age group. Do you have an age group in mind?
I have 10 and 12-year-old and older kids.
10 and 12-year-olds. And is it learning United States history? Is it Adventist history? What are they looking for?
I was just wondering are you writing a book right now in history, or?
I am writing a dissertation, which eventually would likely be turned into a book, which would take some time. So I can't recommend anything that I have necessarily written just yet. But if it's history in general, 10, 11, 12-year-olds, there are some just good American classics that I'm thinking about. Oh my, I wish that my mother were here, who has taught literature for a long time, including African American literature. She would have some better recommendations. But that's a great question. That's something where I feel like I need to sit down and really make a list. But I will say that especially during Black History Month, which I know has ended now, but there are some good lists that people always post all over, whether that's social media or just Barnes and Noble. Other people will say that here's a good list of books for this specific age group. And yeah, usually there's some excellent books on there by great scholars that are appropriate for younger age groups and as they move into high school as well. So yeah, there's some good stuff out there.
Yeah, because I was raised in the North too, like Dolly said, and and I read Uncle Tom's Cabin. That's when I first understood that there was a real problem at some point, and I was really little when I read that book. So
Yes. In fact, I didn't read that book until I was in college. So Uncle Tom's Cabin is a great one. The narrative and life of Frederick Douglass is a great one. Of course, he wrote three different versions of that narrative. Of course, there is Harriet Beecher Stowe is the person who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, but there's some other slave narratives that are also excellent. A lot of Equiano is an interesting story as well. There are just so many. I could name some for days. But yeah, great question. Any other final questions before I guess this is the conclusion of our time together? Once again, I'm thankful for the opportunity. Thank you, Pastor Dr. Jonathan, for inviting me to do this. It's a shame that we didn't get a chance to do this together as we had planned in the way that we wanted to a month ago. But I'm so thankful that so many of you came on a Sabbath afternoon to learn some more about our shared heritage together. And like I think I just saw in the chat, if you go to Black SDA History, I think it's .org, Dr. Benjamin Baker does excellent work. He is the most prolific Black Adventist author that we have. He has written, it feels like everything about anything. And not only that, but he also repurposes a lot of that material for his YouTube channel, and you can continue to check that out and engage with it deeply. And Pastor Jonathan has my email and things like that. So if you just have one-off questions that you were just a little bit too shy to ask, or just were thinking about some additional things, you can reach me there as well, and we can have a dialogue together. Um, this work it's fun, but we have so much more work to do, and I encourage you to do that in your own communities and to take this Adventist idea that all have come short, um, and that we have more to do together, um, especially for particular people. I encourage you to take that into your communities, in your job, and at your church to continue to challenge each other and to be a blessing to those around you.
All right. Well, thank you, Philip. Thank you for everyone who participated. And let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll wrap things up. Father God, we thank you for the ministry that you've given to Philip, the wisdom and the skill that he has received from you, and to be able to bless us and to be able to inform us with this. But Father God, I pray that the information that we've learned can lead us to action, can lead us to love one another, can lead us to bring healing in our communities and unity wherever it is that we find ourselves. And so we pray that you continue to bless us and guide us. And we ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you all so very much. Have a wonderful, happy Sabbath.